Well, hello to all of you, wherever you happen to be today. You are listening to or watching or both Unstoppable Mindset, and I am your host, Mike Hingson. Our guest today is Devin Miller, who founded the company Miller IP, and he'll tell us all about that and what that means and so on as we go through this. But I will tell you that he is a lawyer. He deals with patents and other things and a lot of stuff relating to startups. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. So, without any further ado, as it were, Devin, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here. Are you there?
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Now I hear you. Well,
All
we're
right.
glad.
Sorry for the delay, but I said I'm excited to be here and looking forward to chatting.
Well, perfect. Well, let's start. I love to always do this. Let's start kind of at the beginning. Why don't you tell us about the early Devin, growing up and all that?
I'm happy to do it. I don't know there's anything that probably stands out. I was probably fairly typical. So I was raised in a religious family. So we attended church regularly every week, and I had a couple sisters, an older and a younger one, and was went through schooling and or studied probably the typical course. So I don't know there's anything that stands out. I was in a small town, so grew up. It was probably not as small as I'd like it to be anymore, but a small farming town. And it was kind of always enjoyed the small town feel, and actually am back to being in that same hometown where I live now with my family. But yeah, so I did that, and I did probably at the time the typical with thing with it's growing up with kids and sports and doing things, and went through high school, and after that jumped or went off to college. But I don't know if there's anything in particular that stands out in my mind, other than probably, at least in my mind, a pretty typical childhood and upbringing. But enjoyed it nonetheless. But happy to provide any details, or I can jump into a bit about college.
Well, where did you go to college?
Yeah, so I went to Brigham Young University, so
Okay.
just BYU, just out here in Utah. So I went off to I graduated high school, and I went off to a year of college. So I went off to BYU, kind of intending to go into electrical engineering, which is what I or one of the degrees I ended up studying with. And then I did that for a year, and after which I went off and did served a religious mission for my church. So
Mm.
Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise nicknamed Mormon. So I went off and went to Taiwan for about 2 years. So didn't have any idea even at that point where Taiwan was, and certainly didn't know the language, but went and studied that. Or they have a training center where you get an opportunity to study it for about 3 months. So I studied it, and then went off to Taiwan and served that religious mission for my church for a couple of years before coming back to high school, or not to high school, to college to continue my studies.
I several comments. One, I know what you mean about small hometowns. We moved from Chicago, where I was born, to California when I was 5. We moved to a town called Palmdale, and it was a very small rural town about 65 miles north of Los Angeles. I don't know what the population was when we first moved there, but it couldn't have been more than 1,000 or 1,500 people spread out over a little bit of a distance. For me, it was great because without there being a lot of traffic, I was able to do things I might not have done nearly as well in Chicago. Things like riding a bike, learning to ride a bike, and walking to school, and not ever fearing about walking to school for any reasons, including being blind. But oftentimes, once I learned how to do it, I rode my own bike to school and locked it in the bike rack, and then rode home and all that. But then Palmdale started to grow, and I'm not quite sure what the population is today, but I live in a town about 55 miles east of Palmdale called Victorville. And as I described Victorville growing up, it was not even a speck on a radar scope compared to the small town of Palmdale. But we moved down to Southern California from the Bay Area, my wife and I, to be closer to family and so on in 2014. and we wanted to build a house for Karen because she was in a wheelchair her whole life. So we wanted to get a house that would be accessible. And my gosh, the only place we could find any property was Victorville. And at that time in 2014, it had 115,000 people in it. It has grown.
No. It has grown, and it tends to be that, it feels like everybody's always kind of chasing the small town. Then or people find out about it, everybody moves in. It's no longer a small town, and then you're off to chasing the next small town, wherever that might be. So it's kind of a perpetual cycle of chasing that small, or at least for the people to like it. Not everybody loves it, but I'm certainly a proponent of chasing that small town feel from place to place as you're trying to. They're trying to find or recreate what you probably grew up with. So it is a cycle that everybody, I think, is chasing.
Yeah. Well, for me now, my wife passed away in 2022. We were married 40 years. And so the thing about it is that there are probably advantages for me living alone, being in a place that has a few more people and a few more of the kind of amenities that at least somewhat larger towns have, like a Costco and some restaurants. We actually live in a homeowners development, a homeowners association called Spring Valley Lake, and I live within walking distance of the country club, which has a nice restaurant. So I'm able to go to the restaurant whenever I choose, and that's kind of nice. So there's value for me in being here. And people say, "Well, do you ever want to move from Victorville now that your wife died?" And I'm going, "Why do I want to do that?" Especially since I have a 3.95% mortgage. I'm not going to do that, and I'm in a new house that, relatively new. It was built in 2016, so it's pretty much built to code, and insulation's great, solar is great on the house, air conditioning works, so I can't complain.
No, sounds like a good setup, and it's kind of one where if you enjoy where you're at, why would you move to go somewhere else that you wouldn't necessarily enjoy? So it just sounds like it works out well.
It does, and I can always, as I need to, being a keynote speaker and traveling, there's a shuttle that'll take me down to the nearest airports, so that works out well.
Oh, that's awesome.
So you went to, I'm a little bit familiar with the whole LDS mission program. We were not part of the church, but we lived when my wife and I got married. We lived in Mission Viejo, and we had neighbors right next door to us who were members of the church. And they came over one day and they said, "We have an issue." And I said, "Okay." And my wife said, "Okay, what's the issue?" "Well, we have a couple of missionaries coming in, and the only homes that are available to these two boys are homes that already have young female girls in them, so they really can't be in those homes. Would you be willing to rent one of your rooms to missionaries?" And so we said, Karen said, because she was a member of the Methodist Church, we said, as long as they don't try to Mormonize us, we won't try to Methodize them, and we would love to do it. And it worked out really well. We had a couple of missionaries for a while, and then they switched out, and eventually we had a gentleman from Tonga for a while, and we actually had a couple girls for a while. So it worked out really well, and we got to know them all, and it was a great relationship, and they did their work. And at Christmas time, they certainly were invited to our Christmas parties. We had every year a party. What we actually had was what we call a Christmas tree upping. We got the tree, we brought it into the house, and we invited all of our friends and neighbors to come and decorate the tree in the house because, needless to say, we weren't going to do that very well. Karen especially wasn't going to be able to stand up and decorate the tree. So we got them to do all the tree decorations and all that, and we fed them. So it worked out.
Oh, that's awesome. Sounds like great. And you hit on, I said, that's probably my favorite part of Christmas is the Christmas tree. So always growing up, we always had a live tree, but it was always, it was downstairs in the basement and had lower ceilings. And so I was always kind of the opinion, hey, when I grow up, I want to have a huge, kind of like in the movies, a 20 plus or 20 plus foot tree.
Yeah.
And or lo and behold, or at least the couple houses that we built have always had, at least in the living space, have had the pretty high ceilings. And so that's always what we do. We'll go out and we'll cut down a live tree. So we'll go out to kind of in nature or to the forest where they let you cut them down, and we'll cut down. Usually it's around a 20 plus foot tree, and then have it strung up in the house. And I always told my wife, I said, I'd rather that could be my Christmas present, and I'd be just as happy because as long as I have my tree, it's a good Christmas for me.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. Well, one of the boys who lived next door to us went off on a mission to, I think it was Argentina, and was gone for, I guess, 2 years. What was really funny is when he came back, it took him a while to reacclimatize to speaking English and getting back his American accent. He definitely had much more of a Spanish accent and was much more used to speaking Spanish for a while. So the 3 month exposure period certainly got him started at the center there in Utah, and then he went off and did his missionary work and then came home. But it's got to be a wonderful and a very valuable experience. How do you think it affected you?
Yeah, I think I think it would be, you said it probably well. Is it like one where you just say, hey, this is the most fun time in your life and you'll never have a more fun time? I don't know that it's kind of like, I like or liken it to I like to do a lot of running. So or in older years, I don't know that I was as much in younger years, but kind of discovered, not that I loved running per se, but loved to get out and decompress and otherwise kind of have a time where I don't have a lot of intrusions or other things that are pressing in on life. And so with that, I've done a number of marathons, and marathons, everybody can say, well, did you have fun, or was it a good marathon? So I don't know that it's ever fun. I don't and do it, but it's a good accomplishment. You go out, you set your mind to something, and otherwise at the end of the day, you reach your goal, and it kind of has that sense of accomplishment and learning and become improving yourself. That's probably a lot of how I like in a mission is, you have a lot of stresses of learning a new language, being in a different culture, doing something that you're unfamiliar with or not accustomed to. And at the end, you learn a lot of things, you or gain a lot of skills, you hopefully impact a lot of people's lives for the better. And so it is definitely one of those where it's a great accomplishment, but it's not, it's not one where you just say, hey, this was a fun vacation where I got to go play for 2 years. So it works out well, and I would absolutely do it again.
Yeah, I'm sure you learned a lot, and you probably learned a whole lot more in a lot of ways than most of the people that you visited with, because you treated it as an adventure, and an adventure to learn. So that's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
So you came back from that and you went back to college, and did you continue in electrical engineering, or what did you do?
Yes and no. So I did continue in electrical engineering, so I came back, and the intent was, and what I continue to do is to study electrical engineering. I did add on a second degree, which was Mandarin Chinese, and so I can't remember. I mentioned I served in Taiwan for those couple of years, and had an opportunity to kind of learn and study the language. So as I was doing that, I kind of came back and said, well, if I've already put in the effort to learn the language and to study it, I might as well, utilize it or add it to the degree. And so I really started, or I added that as a second degree to the first degree. So I came out with both the degree in Chinese or Mandarin Chinese, as well as electrical engineering. So yes, continue to study that. And then from that, kind of just as a part of that story. So I was coming out, kind of getting, the senior year, kind of getting towards the end of that degree, and looked at it and said, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I still don't know if I know the full answer, but I did look at it and say, hey, I don't know exactly what I want to do when I grow up, but I like engineering, but I don't want to be an engineer. In the sense that, not that I didn't like engineering, but it was one where a typical electrical engineer, as you come out of graduate school, you go work for a big company, you're a very small cog in a very big wheel. You work for, 10, 15 years to gain enough experience to have any say or direction in what projects you work on or really have any impact. And I'm saying that's not really what I want to do when I grow up or when I start into the working world. And so kind of with that, I had a couple interests. I enjoyed, kind of the startup, small business, kind of that type of world. And I also found it interesting to on the legal aspect of intellectual property, so patents, trademarks, and really more with the idea of, hey, going to work with a lot of cool and or cool inventions, cool people are working on a lot of unique things, and you get a lot more variety, and you get to, kind of be more impactful. And so that was kind of the crossroads I found myself at, saying kind of which direction I want to go. And, kind of rather than take one or the other, I split the road and decided I was going to do both. So I went off to graduate school and did both an MBA, or a master's in business administration, as well as a law degree, kind of focused more on intellectual property. So went off and studied both of those, kind of with the intent of, I don't want to just be fit into one box or do just one thing, but I'd like to keep a foot in the business world, startup world, and have an opportunity to pursue my own business, as well as doing the law degree. So I did that in a Case Western Reserve out in Cleveland, Ohio, studying both of those degrees.
When you were getting your degree in Mandarin Chinese, was that all about speaking the language, or was it also involved in history and civilization and understanding more about China? What was it like?
It was really more. Certainly, there was or I guess, are you saying within college or within the mission itself?
In college.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it was still primarily focused on the language. The
Okay.
nice thing is you can test out a number of the, entry level or their beginning classes, as long as you can show a proficiency. So there may have been some of that, and you still got, some of the classes you still study a little bit of poetry, or, within the language context, they'd use poetry as a way to kind of learn different aspects of the language. You'd get a little bit of history, but vast majority of the focus was kind of both speaking as well as the written. And those are really, as opposed to like English speaking, where it's phonetics and you can or sound out and kind of understand what something means by sounding it out. You don't have to know the word in order to pronounce it. Chinese is not that way. So you have characters that are just, every character you have to memorize. There is no phonetics. There's no way that you can look at a character and sound it out. And so there's a large amount of just memorizing 20,000 characters to read a newspaper type of a thing. And then on the flip side is you have to learn the language, which is which are already focused on that more on the mission, but you have to do pronunciation. So you can say the same word with different tones and it has entirely different meanings. So it was really, there was enough there on the language side that you tended to primarily focus on that, just because there was quite a bit there to dive into.
It's a complicated language.
It is certainly or uniquely different from English. I would say probably English to Chinese speakers is the hardest language, because it's the most different from their language, and vice versa for English speaking. Chinese is at least one of the harder languages, because it is entirely different. So it is one that has a lot of intricacies that you get to learn.
I took German in high school for 3 years, and then in college, I did a lot of shortwave listening and encountered Radio Japan a bunch. So I actually took a year of Japanese. And I think from a written language, it's a lot more complicated than a spoken language. I think it's a lot more straightforward than Chinese, and in a lot of ways easier to learn. But even so, it is different than Latin languages by any standard. But
yeah, it's an animal in and of itself, but it makes it fun.
Yeah, that's right. It does make it fun. And as I said, it was an adventure, and all of that was an adventure. My master's is in physics. That was an adventure. And until you spend a lot of time dealing with physics and hopefully getting beyond just doing the math, you learn how much of a philosophical bent and how much about society and the way things work really is wrapped up in physics. So it's kind of fun. Unlike a lot of physicists or engineers, I've never thought that one is better or worse than the other. I think they both have purposes. And so as a physics person, I never pick on engineers.
I wouldn't pick on I wouldn't pick on any or physics or physicists or physics majors either, because that's equally, if not more difficult. And so there's a lot of learning that goes on and involved with all of them, but all of them are fun areas to study with.
They are. So once you got your master's degrees and you got your law degree, what did you go off and do?
Yeah, so I mean, I would probably back it up just a little bit. So, kind of during that period where I was getting the degrees, a couple things happened. Had a couple kids. So, started out first kid while I was doing I guess the second year where I was in or doing the law and MBA degree, do it as a
Mm.
joint degree, and so had a kid. And then during that same period, the next year, about a year and a half later, had another kid. And so that puts me, it's a 4-year program if you combine both of them together. And so I was in the kind of the third year of the 4-year program. And while I was doing those studies, I was doing a couple things. One is I was doing the both or studying both majors, raising the family. I was working about 20 hours as a law clerk or for a law firm. And then during that, I can't remember or if it was a flyer or if it was an email or whatnot, but came across a business competition where it's kind of a excuse me. It was kind of a multidisciplinary competition where people of different degrees and different fields of study would get together. You'd form a group of 4 or 5, and you'd work on developing an idea, and then you would enter it into the competition and see how it goes. And so we did that the first year, and we did something, an idea to make gym bags less smelly, and entered that in and took second place. And during that period, next year comes along, we're all in our final year of our degree. And as we're doing that, we are studying the degree and or entering the competition again, and we decided to do something different. It was for wearables. This was before Apple Watch or
Hmm.
the Fitbit or anything else. It was well before any of that. But we just said, hey, wouldn't I was there thinking, hey, wouldn't it be cool? I ran I think my second marathon that time. Wouldn't it be awesome if you could monitor your hydration level so that you can make sure you're staying well hydrated throughout, and it helps with or not being as sore and being quicker recovery and performing better. And so out of that took the genesis of that idea and entered it back into the or that is a new idea into the business competition, and did that with the partners and took second place again. Still a little bitter about that because the people that took first place has entered the same thing that they entered the previous year, but polished or took the money they'd earned previously and polished it, made it look a little nicer, and won again because it looked the most polished. But that aside, was a great competition. Enjoyed it, and from that, it said, "Hey, I think this is a good idea. I think it can be something that you could actually build a business around." And so I said, "Hey," or kind of told the people that were in the group with me, we're all graduating, we're going different directions. Would be pretty hard to do a startup all together. So why don't we do this? Or why don't you guys take all the money that I got, that we you earn some reward money or prize money. Did
Yeah.
you take my portion, split it amongst yourselves, and I'll just take ownership of the idea, whatever it is, wherever I take it, and simply own it outright. Basically buying them out. And so that's what I did. So coming out of getting the MBA and the law degree, that was kind of always the intent. So, or coming out of school, I went and joined a law firm here in Utah. I was a full-time patent attorney, and then alongside, had the side hustle. What I'd really say is kind of a second full-time job, to where I was, pursuing that startup or small business alongside of doing the law firm. So that was kind of the genesis for as I graduated, full-time attorney working, with a lot of cool clients and other things, and then also incorporating the desire to do a startup or a small business. And that's kind of been really the trajectory that I've taken throughout my career is really, finding ways to combine or to pursue both interests together.
What happened to the business?
Yeah, so it's still alive today. I exited, now it's been a couple year and a half, 2 years, somewhere in there. I have to think back. So it started out, so with the business, I started out, it was actually one where, rewinding just a little bit, when I got started, my dad was also an electrical engineer. He'd actually, he's well or farther into his career, and he'd done a number of different things across their medical devices through his
Hmm.
career. And so he joined on as kind of doing it with a side hustle with me. And we took that, started to build it. We brought on some additional team members. We brought on an investor and actually built out and grew the business. It also evolved. So we were starting to test out the technology, have it with some colleges and some other, athletes, which was a natural place to start it at. And about that time, we were getting kind of to that next hurdle where we either needed to get a further investment or cash infusion, to kind of take it to a more of a marketable, a polished, full or ready to go to market type of product. And at that time, as we were exploring that, we had, or came or got connected with somebody that was more in the diabetes monitoring. They were doing it more from a service base, but the overlay as to kind of how the technologies would overlap with what they're doing tended to work out pretty well.
Mm.
And so we ended up combining the business to be one where it was redirected a lot of the technology we developed underlining to be more of a wearables for the diabetes monitor. So that was a number of years ago. I stayed on doing a lot of some of the engineering and development, primarily more in the intellectual property realm, doing a lot of patents and whatnot. And then about a year and a half, 2 years ago, got bought out, was exited from that company, and that continues on today. It's still alive and growing, and I kind of watch it from from a distance, so to speak, or kind of continue to maintain interest, but are not necessarily active within the business anymore. So that was kind of a long answer to a shorter question, but that's kind of where the business eventually evolved to.
So now I'm sure that the company is doing things like developing or working with products like continuous glucose monitors and so on.
Yep, yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
the direction as to what they're headed. Yep.
Well, and what's been interesting about several of the CGM type devices is that for people who are blind, there's been a real push to try to get some of them to be accessible. And
Mm.
what finally occurred about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, is that one of the devices that's out there was approved to actually incorporate an app on a smartphone. And
Mhm.
when the app came out, then it was really easy, although it took an effort to convince people to pay attention to it and do it. But it became technically a lot easier to deal with access because all you had to do was to make the app accessible.
Oh,
And
cool.
so there now is a continuous glucose monitor that is accessible, wherein you get all the information from the app through VoiceOver, for example, on the iPhone, or through TalkBack on a Android phone
Sure.
that you get when you're just looking at the screen, which is the way it really should be anyway. Because if you're going to do it, you
Sure.
should be inclusive and make it work for everyone.
No, that's cool. Yeah, there's a number of, I think, between it being a prevalent, issue that people are dealing with to, different trying to address things earlier on and also to motivate people to a healthier lifestyle and kind of the direction I think is headed and where a lot of the company that continues on today from our original technology is on the non-invasive side. So a lot of them you have to have a patch or you have to have periodically prick or put an arm or
Right.
something where it has a needle in the arm. And this one is kind of trying or working to take it to that next level to where it's no longer having to be invasive and it's really all without having or with sensors that don't require you to have any sort of pain or prick in order to be able to utilize it. So kind of fun to see how the industry continues to evolve.
Well, today we're working on that, and tomorrow, of course, the tricorder. So we'll get to Star Trek.
Absolutely, one step at a time.
Yeah, but I've kind of figured that people were certainly working on non-invasive technology so that you didn't have to have the sensor stuck in your arm, and I'm not surprised that's coming and will be around before too long, just because we're learning so much about other ways of making the measurements that it makes sense to be able to do that.
Yep, no, absolutely. And it is a hard nut to crack. The body is very complex, a lot of things going on, and to measure it non-invasively is certainly a lot that goes into it. But I think there's a lot of good technology that's coming out, a lot of progress is being made, and certainly fun to continue to see how the health devices continue to hit the market. So certainly a cool area.
So why did you decide, or maybe it was a natural progression, but why did you decide to go into patent law?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably a natural progression, and in the sense that, it is one where overall the desire was, hey, I like engineering from the sense I like to think or how things work and kind of break things down and to have a better understanding. So really, intellectual property law, patents and trademarks and others allowed me to work with a lot of startups and small businesses, see a lot of cool things that they're developing, still play a hand in it, and yet also not, be mired down to a long project over multiple years where you are a small cog in a big wheel. And so
Yeah.
that was kind of one where it fit well within kind of the overall business, business desire and business aspect of what I wanted to accomplish, and also just overall, enjoying it. So that's kind of where it might, it married well with the desire to do startups and small businesses, as well as to work with a lot of other startups and small businesses.
That's a lot of fun to be able to deal with startups and see a lot of new and innovative kinds of things. And being in patent law, you probably see more than a lot of people, which does get to be exciting in an adventure, especially when you see something that looks like it has so much potential.
Yep, no, it is fun. I get to see everything from I've worked on everything from boat anchors to credit card or devices that help or elderly people to remove them more easily from their wallet, to AI, to drones, to software, other or software platforms, to medical devices. So it gives a ability to have a pretty good wide exposure to a lot of cool different, or, very different types of
Yeah.
innovations, and makes it just, a fun time, and be able to work with their businesses as they develop all those different technologies.
Well, on the law side of things, what's the difference between a provisional patent and a non-provisional filing?
Yeah, so I don't back it up, and I'll get to your question, but maybe I'd set the stages to when you're looking at what is the difference between a patent, trademark, and copyright. Because a lot of times when people look at that,
That's
they'll say,
probably a
"What I
good
want to get
question
a
too. Yeah.
provisional trademark, or I want a, or a non-provisional copyright, or whatever it might be," and kind of get the terminology mixed up. So if you're to take it one step back, a provisional or a patent is something that goes towards protecting an invention. So something that has the functionality that does something, that accomplishes something. A trademark is going to be something that is protecting of a brand. So name of a company, name of a product, a catchphrase, a logo, those type of things all really fall under trademarks. And copyrights are going to be something that's more creative in nature. So a painting, a sculpture, a picture, a book, all those type of things are going to fall under copyrights. And so really when you're looking at it, kind of breaking it down initially, you look at it as, which one is it? And so now to your question,
Well,
if
before
you're
you
to
go
look at
there,
patents. Oh,
before you
yeah, go ahead.
before you go there, so if I'm writing software, does that fall
Mhm.
under patent or copyright? I would assume if the software is to do something, it would be a patent.
So software primarily is under a patent. So there's technically you can copyright software. Now it's pretty limited in its scope of protection. So if you're to do or software and do it under a copyright, really all it protects is the exact way that you wrote the code. So
Got
hey, I
it.
use this exact coding language. If somebody would come along, copy and paste my code, you would be protected. But it doesn't protect the functionality of how this code works or what it does. It is purely just how you wrote the code. So most of the time when you're looking at software, it's really going to be more under a patent, because you're not going to want to just simply protect the identical way that you wrote the code, but rather what it does and
What
how
it
it
does,
functions.
yeah.
So, yeah. So yeah, you for if you're to do as your example software, primarily it's gonna fall under patents in order
Patent.
to protect it.
Okay, so anyway, back to provisional and non-provisional.
Yeah, so when you're looking at doing a patent, there's a couple different types of patents. One is a design patent. It really just goes to something, the aesthetic nature, the look and feel of an invention. So if you're to think of the iPhone, it used to have the curved edges, it had the
Hmm.
circle or button at the bottom, it had, the speaker placement and all those things, and it was just that outward appearance, not the functionality, could go under a design patent. But what the primary patent, which is what most people pursue, is what's called the utility patent application. And the utility patent application is really going towards the functionality of how something works. So the utility, how it works, what it does, and kind of the purpose of it. And so with that, when you're looking at pursuing a utility patent application, there are a couple different types of patents that or types of utility patent applications. So as you mentioned, one is called a provisional patent application. The other one is called a non-provisional patent application. So a provisional patent application is kind of set up a lot of times for startups or small businesses, where they're going to have a product or an innovation that they're working on. They're in earlier stages. They're wanting to kind of protect what they have while they continue to develop it and kind of flesh it out. So provisional patent application is set up to be a 1-year placeholder application. So it will get, you file it, you'll get patent pending, you'll get a date of invention, and it'll give you a year to decide if you want to pursue a full patent application or not. So you can file that, gives you that 1-year time frame as a placeholder. The non-provisional patent application would be the full patent application. So that would be what has all the functionality, all the features, all the formalities, and it will go through the examination process where they'll look at it for patentability. So those are kind of the difference. Provisional, 1-year placeholder, less expensive, get your patent pending, versus the non-provisional, that's the full patent application that gives you kind of that, or we'll go through examination.
Do most people go through the provisional process just because it not only is less expensive, but at least it puts a hold and gives you a place?
It really just depends on where people are at. So kind of, a lot of times people will ask, hey, well, what would you recommend? And I'll usually say, hey, there are typically 2 reasons why I would do a provisional patent application. And if you don't fall into either of those camps, then I would probably do a non-provisional patent application.
Got it.
So generally the 2 reasons I give, one is certainly budgetary. Give you an example. So our flat fee, we do primarily everything flat fee at my firm, and a provisional patent application to prepare and file it, our flat fee is $2,500, versus a non-provisional patent application is $6,950. So one is, hey, you're a startup, small business, to have a limited funds, you're wanting to get a level of protection in place while you continue to pursue or develop things, then you would oftentimes do that as a provisional patent application. And the other reason a lot of times where I would recommend it is if you're saying, hey, we've got a initial innovation, we think it's going to be great, we're still figuring things out, so we'd like to get something in place while we continue to do that research and develop it and kind of further figure it out. So that would be kind of, if you fall into one of those camps where it's either budgetary overlay or it's one where you're wanting to get something in place and then take the next year to further develop it, then a provisional patent application is oftentimes a good route. But there are also a lot of clients say, hey, we pretty well did the research and development and getting ready to release it in the marketplace. While we don't have unlimited funds, we still have the ability to just simply go straight to a non-provisional so we can get the examination process started, and then they'll go that route. So both of them are viable routes. It's not kind of necessarily one is inherently better or worse than the other. It's kind of more where you're at along the process and what kind of fits your needs the best.
But at least there is a process that gives you options, and that's always good.
Absolutely.
Patent laws, I won't say it's straightforward, but given, in our country today, we've got so many different kinds of things going on in the courts and all that. And sometimes one can only shake one's head at some of the decisions that are made regarding politics and all that. But that just seems to be a whole lot more complicated and a lot less straightforward than what you do with patent law. Is that really true? Or are there lots of curves that people bend things to go all sorts of different ways that make life difficult for you?
Probably a little bit of both. I think that so the legal system in general is a much more slower moving entity. So it does have a bit more of a kind of a basis to anticipate where things are headed in general. Now, the exception, as there always is an exception to the rule, is that anytime the Supreme Court gets involved with patent law cases, I'd say 95% of the time they make it worse rather than better. So, you get judges that none of them are really have an experience or background in patent law. They've never done it. They really don't have too much familiarity with it. And now they're getting posed questions that are fairly involved and intricate, and most of the time when they make decisions, they make it worse. It's less clear. It's not as great of understanding, and it otherwise complicates things more. And so when you get the Supreme Court involved, then they can kind of make it more difficult or kind of shake things up. But by and large, it is not that there isn't a lot of involved in going through the process to convince the patent and examiner of the patent office of patentability and make sure it's well drafted and has the as good of coverage and scope, but at least there is to a degree that ability to anticipate, what's going to be required or what you may likely be looking at. The other exception is ironically, I think the patent office is the only budget or producing or budget positive entity within all of the government. So every other or part of the government spends much more money than they ever make. The patent office is, I think the postal office at one point was the other one, and they have now are always in the red and never make any money. But they are the patent office. Now the problem with that is you think, great, well now they can reinvest, they can improve, they should have the best technology, they should be the most up to date, they should have all the resources because they're self-funding, and yet there's always a piggy bank that the government goes to raid and redirects all of those funds to other pet projects. And so the patent office is always perpetually underfunded, as ironic as that is, because they always get the piggy bank raided. And so with that, if you're to go into a lot of the patent office, their interfaces, their websites, their databases, their systems, it feels like you're the onset of the or late 90s, early 2000s as far as everything goes. And so that always is not necessarily your question, but it's always a bit aggravating that, you can't, as an example, can't submit color drawings. People ask, can you submit videos? Nope, you can't submit any videos of your invention. Can you provide, other types of information? Nope, it's really just a written document, and it is line drawings that are black and white, and you can't submit anything beyond that. So it's one where I think eventually it will sometime maybe shift or change, but it's going to be not anytime soon. I don't think there's any time on the horizon, because they're kind of stuck at once they moved over to the lit or initially onto the computer system. That's about where that evolution stopped.
Well, the other thing though with videos, especially when you get AI involved and so on, are you really seeing a video of the invention, or are you seeing something that somebody created that looks great, but the invention may not really do it? So I can understand their arguments, but there have to be ways to deal with that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that even prior to AI, even we just had, video has been around for 20 or 30 years, even, digital format or longer than that probably. And the problem is, I think it's more of the searchability. So if you have a drawing, you can more easily search drawings and compare them side by side and be able to do it. If you have a video, what format is the video in? Is it a, dot movie or dot MOV, or is it dot MP4? Is it color? Is it black and white? How do you capture it? Is it zoomed in? Is it, or can it show all the details, or is it zoomed out? And I think that there's enough difficulty in comparing video side by side and having a rigid enough or standardized enough format. The patent office said, man, we're not going to worry about it. Yes, we could probably figure something out, but that's more work than any administration or any of the directors of the patent office ever want to tackle. So it just always is kind of kicked down the road.
Do they ever actually want to see the invention itself?
Not really. I mean, so the short answer is no. Okay. I mean, they want to see the invention as it's captured within the patent application. So the problem is
just the drawing. They don't want to see the actual device or whatever it is.
Well, and a lot of times, as a inventors, as the patent applicants, as the inventors and the owners, you're saying, hey, but I want to show them the invention. Problem is, the invention doesn't always mirror exactly what's showing in the patent application, because you're on generation 3 of your product. Patent application is still in generation 1, and so it doesn't mirror. And so the examiners are supposed to, they don't always or aren't always good, and sometimes pull things in they shouldn't, but they're supposed to just consider whatever is conveyed in the patent application. It's a closed world, and so bringing those additional things in. Now technically you can request a live in-office interview with the examiner where you sit down live. You can bring in your invention or other details and information, and when you do it live face-to-face with an interview, you can walk them through it. Very few people, attorneys ever do that, because one, clients aren't going to want to pay for you to fly to one of the offices, put you up in a hotel, sit or spend a day or two with the examiner to walk them through it. It just adds a significant amount of expense. Examiners don't particularly like it because they have to dedicate significantly more time to doing that than what they're allotted. So they basically are doing a lot of free work. And then you're pulling in a lot of information that they really can't consider. So you technically can, but I would say that, likelihood of or the majority of attorneys, 99 point whatever percent, don't do that, including myself. I've never been to do a live one just because it doesn't have enough advantage to make it worthwhile.
Well, in talking about the law and all the things that go on with it, one of the things that comes to mind is, let's say you have somebody in the United States who's patenting or has made a patent. What happens when it all goes to, it gets so popular or whatever that now it becomes an international type of thing? You've got, I'm sure, all sorts of laws regarding intellectual property and patents and so on internationally. And how do you get protection internationally for a product?
File it in each country separately. So, there are people, and I understand the inclinations. Hey, I want to get a worldwide or a global patent that covers everything in every country. The short answer is you can't. I mean, technically you could if you filed a patent into every country separately. Nobody, even including when I used to work or do work for companies, including Intel and Amazon and Red Hat and Ford, they don't have patents in every single country throughout the world because they just don't have enough marketplace. You go to a very small, let's say a South African country that, where they just don't sell their product enough in it. It just doesn't make the sense, or the courts or the systems or the patent office isn't well enough to find, or it's not enforceable enough that it just doesn't capture that value. And so there isn't a ability to have a global or a worldwide patent. And it really is one where you have to file into each country separately. They each have their own somewhat similar criteria, still a different, somewhat similar process, but they each have their own criteria and their process that has to go through examination. So when you're looking at, when you want to go for whether it's in the US or any other country, when you're deciding where you want to file it, it's really a matter of what marketplaces you're going to be selling the product into. So if you look at it, and I have as an example some clients that 95% of their marketplace is all in the US. That's where they anticipate that's probably where they're going to sell it. Well, yes, you could go and file if you have 2% of your marketplace in Japan, you could go file a patent and get it into Japan, but you have such a small amount of your marketplace that's probably there that it doesn't make sense. And vice versa, we'll have as an example, and a lot of times in the medical devices, they'll a lot of times file both in the EU as well as in the US, because those are two of the predominant medical device and places where a lot of innovation is going on, where there's a lot of focus on utilization, development of medical devices, and there's just a lot of that demand. And so you're really going to look at it is where's your marketplace. The other times are that people a lot of times will get tripped up on. So they'll say, well, I probably need to file into China, right? And I said, well, maybe, because the inclination is, well, everybody just goes to China, they'll knock off the product. And so I want to have a patent in China so that I can, fight against the knockoffs. And that isn't, while I, again, understand why they would ask that question, it wouldn't be the right way to convey it. Because if all it is you have no real, no desire, no plan to go into China, you're not going to sell it, you're not going to build a business there. If they're knocking it off and just doing it in China, so to speak, then there isn't going to be a need to file a patent into China because you don't have any marketplace in there and there's nothing really to protect. And if somebody makes it in China, just picking on China, making as an example, and imports it into the US, you can still enforce your patent or otherwise or utilize it to stop people from importing knockoffs
because it's in the US.
Because they're selling it, importing it, or otherwise doing activities in the US. So it's really a matter of where your marketplace is, not where you think that somebody might knock it off, or hey, I'm going to try and get a global patent, even though my marketplace is really in one or two spots.
What about products like, say, the iPhone, which are commonly used all over?
Yeah, they'll do a lot of countries. They still won't do every
They'll
single
still
country,
do
kind of
country by country, though. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll do a lot of countries. Don't get me wrong. A lot of iPhones are sold throughout the world, but they'll still look at it as to where it is, and they still have issues with that. So one of the interesting tidbits, as an example, so going back and rewinding a time, taking Apple as an example, they came out with originally the iPod, then they had the iPhone, and then they had the iPad. Now the question is, when they originally came out with their watch, what did they call it?
Apple Watch.
Apple Watch. Now, why didn't they call it the iWatch, which would have made sense? It goes right along with the iPhone, the iPad, the iPhone, the all of those iPod and that. And it was because somebody had already got a trademark in China that was for a different company unrelated to the Apple that had it for the iWatch. And so when Apple tried to go into the country, they tried to negotiate, they tried to bully, they weren't able to successfully get the rights or to be able to use iWatch within China. China was a big enough market. And so they had, and rather than try and split it and call it the iWatch everywhere but China and trying to have then the Apple Watch in China, they opted to call it the Apple Watch. Now, I think they might have eventually resolved that. And I think it's now can be referred to it as the iWatch. I'm not sure, but for at least for a long period of time, they couldn't. They called it the Apple Watch when they released it for that reason. So even if you have, a big company, one of the biggest ones in the world, you still have to play by the same rules. And while you can try and leverage your size and your wealth and that to get your way, there's still those hindrances. So that's kind of maybe a side note, but it's kind of one that's interesting.
So that's the trademark of how you name it. But how about the technology itself? When the Apple Watch was created, I'm assuming that they were able to patent that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they will have. I'm sure they probably have anywhere from 30 to 100 to 200. I mean, they'll have a significant amount of patents, even just within the Apple Watch. Everything from the screen, the display, how it's waterproof, how it does communications, how it does the battery management, how it does the touch, how it does the interface. All of those are going to be different aspects that they continue to, did it originally in the original Apple Watch and are always iterating and changing as they continue to improve the technology. So generally, I'm sure that you will start out with as a business of protecting, you're getting a foundational patent where you kind of protect the initial invention. But if it's successful and you're building it out, you're going to continue to file a number of patents to capture those ongoing innovations. And then you're going to file it into all of the countries where you have a reasonable market size that makes it worthwhile to make the investment.
So if you have a new company and they've got a name and all that, what should new businesses do in terms of looking and performing a comprehensive search of trademarks and so on to make sure they are doing the right thing?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, it depends on the size of the company, your budget. There's always the overlay of, you can want to do everything in the world, and if you don't have the budget, then you have to figure out what goes in your budget. But if I'll take it from kind of a startup or a small business perspective, you first thing you should do is just, as stupid and as easy as it sounds, you should go do a Google search. Or now that you have ChatGPT, go do a ChatGPT search and a Google search. But because it's as interesting as it sounds, or is you think that, oh, that's kind of a give me or an automatic. I'll have still, even till today, people come into my office, they'll say, hey, I've got this great idea, this great invention, and I'd like to explore getting a patent on it. And they'll start to walk me through it. I'm like, I could have sworn I've seen that before. I've seen something very similar. We'll sit down at my desk, take 2 minutes, do a Google search, and I'll say, so is this the product that you're thinking of? Oh yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, well, you can't really get a patent on it, something that's already invented and out there. And so, do a little bit of research yourself. Now, there is a double-edged sword because you can do research and sometimes you'll have one of two things happen. You'll not having the experience and background, not entirely knowing what you're doing, you'll do research and you'll either one say, hey, I've done a whole bunch of research. I can't really find anything that's similar when in fact there's a lot of similar things out there. There's a patent and people will say, yeah, it's the same invention, but my purpose is a little bit different. Well, you can't, if it's the exact same or invention, whether or not you say your purpose is different, doesn't get around their patent. And same thing on a trademark. Yeah, their brand's pretty much identical, but they're doing legal services and I'm doing legal tools, and so it's different. And it's one where they have a false sense of security because they rationalize in their head why it's different. Or vice versa, you also get people that will say, hey, this is, even though it's significantly different, it's the same purpose. And so while they really could go do the product, while they could get a patent or a trademark, because they think that it's just overall kind of the same concept, then they talk themselves out of it when they don't need to. So I would say start out doing some of that initial research. I would do it if I was in their shoes, but temper it with, do it as an initial review. If there's something that's identical or the same that's out there, then it gives you an idea. Probably, you're not going to be able to, at a minimum, get or patent or intellectual property protection, and you may infringe on someone else's. But if if there's some differences, or after you do that initial research, that's probably the time, if you're serious about, investing or getting a business up and going, you'd probably engage an attorney to do a more formal search where they have the experience in the background and ability to give a better understanding or determination as to whether or not something presents an issue.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. If I've developed something and I have a patent for it, and then I suddenly discover that people are selling knockoffs or other similar devices on places like Amazon and so on, what do you do about that? Because I'm sure there
So
must be a bunch of that does go on today.
Yeah, yes, it does. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not as probably as prevalent as some people think. In other words, not every single product is
Right.
being knocked off. Not everything is copied. Sometimes it's because, either I don't have the ability, I don't have the investment, I don't have it's not a big enough marketplace, I don't have the manufacturing, I don't have the connections, or I just simply am respectful and I'm not going to go do it just or because I'm not going to try and rip off, what I think is someone else's idea. So it doesn't happen that as frequently as I think sometimes people think it does, but it certainly does occur. There's a competitive marketplace, there's a profit incentive, and if there's a good product that's out there that people think they can do something with, then there's a motivation to do it, either because people are unaware that it's an issue, or that they're unaware that they can't copy it or it's protected. And so if you get into that, there's a few potentially different recourses. One is, a lot of times you'll start out with a cease and desist letter. Now, caveat, a cease and desist letter doesn't have any legal teeth. It is basically a letter that you can either send yourself, or if you want to look more serious, you have a law firm send, that basically says, hey, we're putting on notice. We believe there's an issue. We'd like to remedy this outside of the court system or the legal system to give you an opportunity to fix it. You're on notice, either fix it or we're going to pursue it, and it's going to cost you a lot more, is kind of the idea. So a lot of times you'll start out with the cease and desist. Now, you don't have to. Some people don't, because they say, hey, it doesn't have any legal recourse, or doesn't have any legal teeth to it. And I just want to get, to work to resolve or get this going in the court system. So some people think, well, I'll get a cease and desist letter. If they get that, then I'll be fine. I'll just stop doing it. No harm, no foul. That's not the case. If you're ripping somebody off, or you're infringing intentionally or not, they can come after you whether or not you stop, just because once you become aware of it. In other words, it's kind of like speeding. You can't just simply say, well, I didn't know that I was going 70 and a 40 mile an hour. I didn't know it was 40 miles an hour. So I'm okay if when the cop pulls me over, if I say I'll go 40 miles an hour now. You can't simply do that. Same thing with infringement. So a lot of times it starts with the cease and desist. Beyond that, you kind of have, depending on where it's being sold, you can sometimes have a couple different options. Always you have the option of going in and doing, enforcing, whether it's patent, trademarks, copyrights, you can enforce those in court. Now, enforcing them in court, if you go through from start to finish, which very small amount of cases go all the way from start to finish, because they usually settle out, but if they go start to finish, a patent lawsuit, you're at least 6, if not 7 figures, sometimes 8 figures to get all the way through. If you go to a trademark lawsuit, you're usually anywhere from 30 to 60 or 70,000. If you go to copyrights, you're probably anywhere from 20 to 40,000. So it's not an insignificant investment. Well, people say, well, then nobody ever enforces your patent. Well, if you're Apple as an example, and you're making millions of or billions of dollars off the iPhone, then a $1 million lawsuit to protect that size of an investment makes sense. If you're only making $10,000 a year off your product, going and doing a lawsuit, even if you have a patent, doesn't make sense. So you do have to have that as an overlay, but it's always an option. With some of the advent of some of things like Amazon, to a lesser degree, social media marketplaces, a lot of times they have options for enforceability that you can pursue. It's not as rigid, or it doesn't have as much or ability to go back and forth and prove your case as a lawsuit. But as an example, if you're selling on Amazon for patents, trademarks, and copyrights, they have their own internal system that you can submit an issue or complaint, and you have to still pay. It's not free, and go through their process. But now you're more like, as an example, if you submit a patent and you have a legitimate, gripe, you can sometimes get through that process for $4,000 to $7,000, which is a lot more doable. And so you can submit, hey, here's what they're doing, here's my patent, here's what their product is. They'll have somebody that isn't a judge or a jury, but is still within their legal department that will look at that, make a determination. Sometimes they'll reach out to you or to the other party and get more details, information, and they will make a determination. So that's oftentimes where, I encourage people to start, just because it is oftentimes a less expensive way that if you can remedy an issue, it gives you a better recourse. It may give you the same outcome that it's less expensive. And that, as I said, you have kind of some of those similar recourses on social media, Facebook Marketplace or others, that you can do some of those same types of enforcement activities. So sometimes you can go other less expensive recourses, and other times you have to decide. The couple others, and then I'll pause. Sometimes you'll say, well, I'll never have that much money. And, I always like to point out, it doesn't mean that just because you can't afford a lawsuit that somebody else can't afford a lawsuit on your behalf. So an example, Apple has every big company, or every company really almost always has a competitor. Apple has Samsung, Coke has Pepsi, Ford has Chevy, those type of things. And so sometimes you're going to say, hey, this, biggest player, Apple's ripping me off. Well, I can't take on Apple. If this is truly valuable and they really are likely infringing, go to Samsung as an example, and either collaborate with them, license your technology and your patent, or look for acquisition. And the bigger players, if it's valuable to them, oftentimes will do that. Or there's also sometimes they get a bad rap, and oftentimes rightly so, but they're what are called patent trolls, which are there in the process of they will look for patents that they think are likely to be infringed, have a legitimate case and are worthwhile to pursue. And they're basically law firms or similar entities that will go and either acquire a patent or work out a deal where they'll enforce it on your behalf. And now they do it without typically a large investment. In other words, they'll front the cost, but they also take a pretty good amount of the damages that are occurring.
Yeah.
So there's a number of different ways to do it, depending on kind of what your circumstance is, how big it is, how big the damages are, how big the other player is. But those are kind of a few of the typical recourses.
So here's a question that I always found interesting. My wife, when she was alive, was a quilter. And one of the things she could never do was to create any kind of quilt or needlepoint or any kind of design using any Disney characters, because Disney had wrapped all of that up, and the word came down to the whole world: if you use a Disney character, we'll sue you. Is that really that? Can that really be locked into that level?
Yeah, pretty much. The short
because it's all trademarked, yes. and Disney is Disney.
Most of it is under copyright. So if you're
or copyright, okay.
Mickey Mouse, his image is going to be copyrighted.
Yeah.
Copyrights are typically, depending on when they're filed and how they do it, 9 years plus the life of the author. So they have a pretty good lifespan. And so, it is copyright. And Disney is a very aggressive. And if I were to give them the one hand, they squash everybody. They will heavily monitor. And even if you're a smaller business, if you get any sort of online presence or any sort of are selling it, they have a lot of tools that monitor all the marketplaces and websites and scraping, and they will eventually, like you, find you. Now, you may, if you're only selling $1,000 or you're just selling it at the farmer's market and you're really not online, it may be difficult to detect you. You may be able to get away with it. But if you get any size or any real presence, especially if you're online, they will find out and they'll come after you and they'll probably sue you. Best case scenario is they'll give you a cease and desist and you'll plead innocence, and they might give you an exception, but I wouldn't count on it.
Yeah.
The one note I would say is that Disney is having a problem of some of their earliest characters and some of their earliest copyrights they've been around long enough that they have their trade or copyrights have now expired. So if you're to take Steamboat Willie as an example, which is really the original Mickey Mouse, right, that is no longer that copyright is expired. So it's gone the life of the copyright and it's available to the public. So if you were to go and base a quilt on a Mickey Mouse character that is Steamboat Willie, you could go do that and they wouldn't have any real recourse. Now, the opposite isn't true. If you go do the current iteration of Mickey Mouse, which does not look the same, has different designs, the ears are bigger, the nose is different, a lot of the shapes are different, that is still under copyrights. And right, so you have to be careful diversion. Same thing with a lot of the Winnie the Pooh characters. Winnie the Pooh is now, or the original Winnie the Pooh is not under copyright anymore. Same thing with Piglet, same thing with Tigger. And that's actually one of the interesting things is as those came out of copyright, so as they were no longer protected, the first thing that the industries did is they went and made a whole bunch of horror slasher movies based on those original characters. And so you can go find a Mickey Mouse a murderous Mickey Mouse that's out there. There's a Winnie the Pooh that's a slasher movie that's out there. They basically took iconic kids, family friendly things and did the exact opposite, which is make it as terrible and as horrible as possible and put it out in a movie. Never seen the movies. I'm not a big slasher and horror
Yeah,
movie
I'm not
fan.
either.
But so those are instances to where yes, they are very aggressive. Same thing, Disney owns Marvel. You do anything with Marvel, same thing. They're going to come after you super aggressively because they have billions of dollars tied up in those
And
brands.
Stan
But
Lee
there
might
are
come. Stan Lee might come and haunt you.
exactly. But so you asked, yeah, they are very aggressive. There would probably be a fairly accurate understanding that they'll come after you, but there are starting to be, because they've been around long enough and their copyrights have expired, some ways to start to navigate around that.
Interesting, but it makes sense, but that's why I asked the question. I was just curious because I sort of assumed that it was really locked up that way, and my wife said we'll never do anything like with Disney characters and all that, and she never put it even in charity quilts and so on, just because
Yep.
they're that protected. And the other side of it is I understand that Disney worked hard to create its brands and so on, so that's
Yeah.
understandable.
The irony always is when you're the startup, the small business, you always say this is unfair. They're picking on it. They're anti-competitive. They don't want to allow for competition. Right up until you create something of your own that's starting to get some value.
Yeah.
And if somebody else comes and knocks it off, then you're right back to, well, I put all this time, money, and effort to build this. I want to make the money. You can't just simply knock it off and copy me. So it always kind of is which side of the coin you're on. If you're on the one that has done the time and the work and the effort, you want to capture and maintain that value. If you're the one that wants to be the competitor to the business, then you always gripe about how unfair it is, how aggressive and anti-competitive they are. So
Yeah,
it's
isn't
kind
it
of
fun?
whichever side which side of the issue you're on.
Have you ever written any books talking about any of this?
I haven't done any books, so
You haven't done any books, huh?
I have technically done one book. So I do my own podcast. It's called The Inventive Journey. We did have some of the top episodes were basically just transcribed and a little bit summarized and adjusted, but really just, it was mostly taking those top episodes and put it into a book format. So technically I wouldn't count it as writing a book because it was really more of taking a podcast and putting it in book form, but that is out there. But beyond that, I do a lot of content. So I've probably done at this point hundreds of blog posts, tons of information, a lot of resources. I do both webinars, I do podcasts, and put out a lot of content, but I haven't really ever taken the time. And the honest reason is part of it, I think books are good and bad in the sense that
Yeah.
written books are dying out. Now that my kids love written books, hard paper cap. I actually like those, but it is slowly decreasing the marketplace. And really, as a business, I've always had a hard time, for me personally, in the industry and business I'm in, finding enough justification for how I would actually go out and make a return on it, as well as leverage it and utilize it to drive clients, which is really what you want to do, right? You put out the book with the intent of, hey, now I'm going to use this as ability to generate clients. The problem is that requires you to go out. You have to get enough readership. You have to be able to market it. You have to link it to your services. And I've just never been able to make that close enough connection to really justify putting out a book. I'm sure I could speak and write and do enough things to fill plenty of pages, but as a business justification, I've always found that, if I put on an online blog post as an example, and I put it on our website and I put it on LinkedIn and others, then it gets SEO. I can share it easily with clients. I can refer back to it within what we do. People find it. So I can put out a lot of that same content that would go in a book without doing it in a book format. And it gives the ability to more directly tie it with the business. So that's always the justification I found for putting it out in different other formats.
Well, even so, since you've done a compilation of podcasts, if you have a picture of the book cover, I'd love to put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I can certainly send it along to you, and
Just
I
attach
think
it as a file.
it's available on Amazon. I don't know how often it gets purchased because we primarily put it out as a client generation. We'd give it away with we do client gift boxes to all of our clients when you're new and on board. You'll get it's a water bottle, you get some treats, you get some other fun things. We put it in there. So we've sold a few books, but it's certainly not from the perspective of, I'm not a top listed author, not a doesn't have lots of reviews and all that. But I'd love to share it, and happy to put
just share the book cover and the picture. That'd be great. Well, if people want to reach out to you and maybe explore using your services, how do they do that?
Yeah, I'll give a few different ways depending on how and what they want to reach out to me for. General website, which has a lot of great content, a lot of information. One thing we do is we have all of our flat fees, which is transparent, makes it easy to understand what things will cost. A lot of resources and, as you said, blog posts and other things. If they just want, the general website is lawwithmiller.com. And they can always go there. If they want to more connect up with me one-on-one, so I offer free consultations, sit down with you for, typically on phone or virtually. They're welcome to come in the office, but we have clients in all 50 states. They can go to strategymeeting.com. That links right to my calendar. It's an easy way to schedule a consultation and chat one-on-one. So that's the second way. And the other one is I'm not overly active. I know we have presence and I post every once in a while on the other platforms. Primarily, I'm on LinkedIn just because I like it because it's more business related.
Yeah.
If they want to go to meetmiller.com, that will direct it to my LinkedIn profile and you can connect up with me there. So general website, lawwithmiller.com. If you want to schedule a consultation, strategymeeting.com. And if you want to connect up with me on LinkedIn, go to meetmiller.com.
Well, Devin, this has been fun, and I've learned a lot. And I always like to feel that I'm learning at least as much as anybody else who listens. So I appreciate your time and all that we've had to talk about today. This has been great. So thank you for doing it. And I want to thank all of you out there for being with us. Love to hear your thoughts. Please feel free to email me at michaelhi, at accessibe.com, accessibe.com. Love to hear from you. Please give us a 5-star rating wherever you're observing our podcast from. We value those ratings very, very much. And of course, for all of you, and Devin, you as well, if you know anyone else who ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, please introduce us. We're always looking for more folks who have stories to tell. And that's what makes this podcast fun. You never know where stories are coming from. But again, Devin, I want to thank you. This has been great, and I really appreciate you being here with us today.
Hey, I've had an awesome time and definitely appreciate you having me on.